In January 2005, a shelter at Holywell in England became the scene of a chilling discovery. Evidence at the scene was limited, and for nearly 2 decades the case remained unsolved. Jennifer Kiely was born in 1970 and spent her early years growing up in Orpington in southeast London. Jennifer later became a mother of 3. Around 1994, following the birth of her 3rd child, she experienced a serious decline in her mental health. As her condition worsened, Jennifer found herself increasingly isolated. Over time, she drifted further away from those who once knew her closely. In 1997, Jennifer was diagnosed with schizophrenia. However, she did not seek or receive treatment for her condition. She moved between hostels and shelters in cities including Canterbury, Brighton, and Eastbourne. During this period, Jennifer lived a highly vulnerable existence, often carrying all of her belongings in a pushchair as she navigated life without a permanent home. On January 22, 2005, 34-year-old Jennifer's body was discovered in a seafront shelter at Holywell. The scene immediately drew attention from the investigators, who quickly recognized the severity of the crime. The body had been stabbed multiple times, and it had also been set on fire, indicating a possible attempt to destroy evidence or conceal the crime. A pushchair was placed over Jennifer's body, which the police interpreted as either an effort to hide her or as a deliberate, cruel act by the criminal. The authorities initially believed that the attack may have been sexually motivated, though Jennifer did not appear to have any direct links to people in the area. Despite the brutality of the case, tangible leads were scarce. Forensic evidence and eyewitness information provided little to guide the investigators, which allowed the case to remain unsolved for several years. After almost 2 decades went by in 2024 to 2025, the investigators re-examined DNA evidence collected from the crime scene, including a cigarette butt found near her body. Advances in familial DNA techniques, which allowed the authorities to identify potential suspects by comparing shared DNA among relatives, enabled the police to trace a match that had previously gone undetected. In December 2025, Sussex police identified Keith Dowbegin as the man they believe was responsible for taking Jennifer's life. Dowbegin was known to use other names, including Keith Black and Keith Broadbent. However, he had passed away in 2014 at the age of 60, meaning he could no longer be prosecuted for the crime. Dowbegin had been arrested in connection to 2 separate inappropriate assault incidents in 2003 and 2004 in Great Yarmouth, Norfolk. DNA analysis revealed that the cigarette butt contained a profile that matched DNA found on Jennifer's body and in her blood. Further comparisons with DNA from prior arrest records held by another police force confirmed the connection, strengthening the link between Dowbegin and the case. The authorities described the DNA evidence as overwhelming, expressing confidence that Dowbegin was indeed the criminal. Despite the inability to bring him to trial, the breakthrough brought clarity to a case that had remained unresolved for nearly 2 decades. Jennifer's family released a heartfelt tribute, remembering her as a gentle, funny, and creative soul. They expressed that while the revelation could not undo the tragedy, resolving the case offered a measure of closure and the opportunity to honor her memory. Jennifer's children added, "I hope her story encourages compassion for those experiencing homelessness and the stigma surrounding mental health. These are issues that affect countless individuals and families, often in silence." On November 1, 1987, the deputies responded and discovered a horrifying scene in Burton, South Carolina. Despite initial leads, the case went cold for decades, leaving the community without answers. Margit Schuller was born on June 21, 1953 in Gardeny, Hungary. She spent her early years in Hungary before relocating to the United States with her family. In Hungary, Margit worked as a cardiac care nurse. She got married to Joseph Schuller in Hungary. The couple had a daughter together before making the decision to immigrate. The Schullers arrived in the United States on April 15, 1982. Initially, they settled briefly in Alabama, adjusting to life in a new culture before moving to Beaufort County, South Carolina. This relocation came after Joseph joined the U.S. Navy and was eventually stationed at Parris Island. Margit and her family lived in the Palmetto Apartments. At approximately 8:45 p.m. on November 1, 1987, the deputies were called to the Palmetto Apartments on Harding Street in Burton. There, 34-year-old Margit was discovered, fatally shot near the complex's laundry room, a shocking scene. Her her 12-year-old daughter made the grim discovery first. After noticing that her mother had not returned from doing laundry, she went to check on her and found Margit lying under a tree, surrounded by a pool of blood. The moment marked the beginning of an intense investigation into the fatal incident. The investigators quickly determined that Margit had been shot sometime between 8:15 p.m. and 8:45 p.m. that evening. Evidence at the scene pointed to a violent struggle. A trail of blood led from the laundry room to the far end of the apartment units. Forensic experts concluded this trail likely belonged to the criminal, who appeared to have been injured during the attack, providing a crucial biological clue in the case. The following day, an autopsy was conducted at the Medical University of South Carolina. The examination confirmed that Margit's life was ended due to severe blood loss resulting from a gunshot wound. The medical findings provided concrete evidence of the fatal assault. The determination of foul play set the stage for a broader investigation into the circumstances surrounding Margit's death, as law enforcement sought to identify the individual responsible for taking her life. In the years following the crime, the investigators identified several persons of interest. Despite their efforts, the limitations of forensic technology at the time made it impossible to definitively connect any suspect to the crime. By 1989, 2 years after Margit's death, a significant development occurred during an unrelated construction project. Workers clearing a site for a new hotel on Highway 21 near Robert Smalls Parkway uncovered a French-made pistol buried in the ground, sparking renewed interest in the investigation. Ballistics testing soon confirmed that the firearm was indeed the weapon used in Margit's fatal shooting. Despite the confirmation, the unearthing of the pistol did not yield enough evidence to identify a suspect. The investigators were unable to trace ownership or establish a clear chain of custody that could point to the criminal, leaving the case without a definitive direction. And then it went cold. As forensic DNA technology advanced, the investigators revisited evidence collected from the crime scene decades earlier. In 2005, after 16 years went by, biological material recovered from the blood trail was analyzed, producing a DNA profile belonging to an unknown male. This breakthrough allowed law enforcement to enter the profile into the combined DNA index system, opening the door to potential identification. Over time, all original persons of interest were eliminated through DNA comparisons. Some were cleared after voluntarily providing samples, while others, including convicted felons, were ruled out using existing profiles already stored in CODIS. Despite these efforts, the identity of the criminal remained unknown for many years. In 2019, after another 14 years went by, the investigation took a significant step forward. The investigators sent DNA evidence to Paraben Nanolabs for advanced analysis and enlisted the help of a cold case committee volunteer to research potential biological connections, utilizing an investigative technique known as genetic genealogy. Paraben Nanolabs also produced composite sketches illustrating how the unknown suspect may have appeared at ages 25 and 55. Using these tools and countless hours of research, the cold case committee volunteer deduced that the offender was likely 76-year-old Cortez Sabino Lake of Beaufort, narrowing the decades-long search to a single individual. The investigators subsequently obtained Lake's DNA during an interview and analysis at the Beaufort County Sheriff's Office Forensic Services Laboratory, confirmed a match to the DNA profile from the crime scene. Lake had lived in the same apartment complex as Margit at the time of the crime. Originally from Illinois, he had served in the United States Navy while stationed in Beaufort County, placing him in close proximity to the victim. On November 18, 2025, the Beaufort County investigators served Lake with an arrest warrant. He was taken into custody and is currently being held at the Beaufort County Detention Center. Joseph says he still struggles with the profound loss of his wife. Reflecting on the life moments their daughter missed without her mother and the grandchildren who never had the chance to know their grandmother, he said he is grateful for the Beaufort County Sheriff's Office's persistence, particularly the work of cold case investigator Bob Bromage. And if he could speak to his wife now, he said his message would simply be, "I am sorry." Joseph believes that if the family had never moved to the United States, Margit might still be alive. One night in March 2017 in Houston, Texas, what was expected to be a normal evening turned into a murder investigation. Pedro Aguilar was born in 1970. At 47 years old, he was married and was a devoted father. His children meant everything to him, and he cared for them deeply. Around 11 p.m. on March 11, 2017, Pedro arrived on the street in front of his apartment complex near Ritchie Drive in Greenbrier Park North. Moments earlier, nothing appeared out of the ordinary as he pulled his vehicle to a stop, unaware that the situation was about to turn fatal. As Pedro remained in his car, two young men suddenly approached. One of them was armed with a handgun. The suspects confronted Pedro, forced him out of the vehicle, and attempted to take it from him. During the encounter, the situation escalated rapidly, and Pedro was shot at the scene. The incident unfolded in full view of nearby passersby. Witnesses quickly realized something was wrong and immediately contacted the emergency services to report the violent act. Their swift response prompted the police officers to rush to the location. When the officers arrived, they found Pedro suffering from fatal injuries. Despite the rapid response, he was pronounced dead at the scene. At the time of the crime, Pedro was not alone. His wife and their 10-year-old daughter were with him that night, placing them directly at the scene during the terrifying moments of the case. The presence of his family added another layer of devastation to the incident. Following the confirmation of Pedro's death, the police officers secured the area and began their investigation. They worked to piece together what had happened, gathering information from witnesses and examining the scene as they searched for answers surrounding the fatal encounter. As the investigation progressed, the police uncovered new details about what led to the fatal outcome. The authorities learned that the suspects were unable to take Pedro's vehicle because it had a manual or stick-shift transmission. The investigators determined that neither of the individuals knew how to operate the car, causing the attempted theft to fail. According to findings from the case, one of the suspects became visibly frustrated when the vehicle could not be driven away. That frustration quickly turned violent, and the criminal discharged the handgun, ending Pedro's life at the scene. What began as an attempted car theft escalated into a fatal crime within moments. The police gathered witness accounts and developed descriptions of the individuals involved. One suspect was described as a black male wearing a black hoodie and carrying a handgun. The second individual was believed to be a light-skinned black male or possibly Hispanic, last seen wearing a white long-sleeved shirt. Further investigation suggested that the two suspects were not acting alone. The detectives believed that a third person had transported them to the area and later picked them up after the incident. This individual was thought to be driving a silver or white four-door sedan. Despite these leads, the case proved difficult to solve. Surveillance footage and composite sketches were released in hopes of generating tips from the public. As part of the ongoing case, DNA evidence recovered from the scene was analyzed early in the investigation. At the time, the genetic material did not match anyone listed in existing police databases, leaving the investigators without a suspect tied directly to the case through forensic evidence. The investigators followed every available lead, but none resulted in arrests. As time passed, momentum in the investigation slowed. Years went by without significant breakthroughs, and the case eventually went cold. Years later, advances in technology allowed the authorities to revisit the evidence. The DNA was retested and then entered into CODIS, the National DNA Database. This step reopened the case and provided the investigators with a renewed opportunity to identify the individual responsible. In December 2025, the DNA profile produced a match. The genetic evidence aligned with a person whose information had been added to the database years after the crime, directly linking him to the case. The match identified 25-year-old Brian Adams as being connected to the crime. Based on this evidence, Adams was taken into custody and formally charged. He was charged with capital murder for his alleged involvement in the case of Pedro. Following the arrest, the police released a statement acknowledging the outcome of the investigation. The officials stated that Pedro had finally received the justice he deserved, bringing a measure of closure after years of unanswered questions surrounding his death. In July 2002, Port Lincoln in Australia was disrupted when a woman was nowhere to be found. A breakthrough only came decades later. Susan Goodwin was born around 1963 in Australia, spending her early years in the countryside before eventually making her home in Port Lincoln on South Australia's Eyre Peninsula. She was the daughter of Don and Margaret Goodwin, and she carried with her the weight of significant loss. During the 1980s, her family faced a profound tragedy when a car accident led to the death of her two sisters and brother. Susan shared her life with her partner Michelle Peterson, forming a quiet household together on Maher Crescent. On July 19, 2002, Susan was expected to pick Michelle up from work, a routine she never overlooked. When the hour passed with no sign of her, Michelle grew uneasy. Upon returning to their home, she noticed the couple's car locked in the driveway, unusual for Susan, who normally left it unlocked. This small detail immediately signaled that something about the evening was not unfolding as it should. Inside the house, nothing appeared disturbed. Dinner had been prepared and neatly placed in the fridge, suggesting Susan had gone about her normal schedule earlier in the day. The home was orderly, showing no signs of a rushed departure. Despite the calm appearance, Michelle felt a growing certainty that something was deeply wrong, a worry that pushed her to take swift action. Unable to locate Susan and convinced the situation was serious, Michelle went to the police station and filed a missing person report. The officers responded promptly, launching an investigation to understand what had happened. From the first steps, they focused on piecing together Susan's last known movements, hoping that tracing her routine would reveal where she had gone that day. The investigators soon learned that Susan typically carried around $140 in cash. A review of her financial activity showed that neither this cash nor her bank accounts had been touched since her disappearance. This finding added to concerns, suggesting that she had not left voluntarily. The police also noted her occasional involvement within Port Lincoln's local drug circle and interviewed several people connected to that environment. But these conversations produced no immediate clues. As the officers continued their inquiries, it became increasingly clear that Susan's sudden absence was entirely out of character. Friends, neighbors, and Michelle all stressed that she lived predictably and rarely deviated from her routines. Extensive search efforts were coordinated by the Port Lincoln State Emergency Service and local police, covering roughly 25 square kilometers of rugged scrubland around the city. Teams combed through thick terrain, working methodically and hoping for any hint that might guide them forward. Michelle said, "When I am driving and I see an area of bushland that has not been searched, I stop the car and look for myself." It is sad and frustrating because there have not been any reported sightings of Susan from the time she disappeared. I think about Susan every day, wondering if she is dead or alive, so there is no closure. Despite their exhaustive work, no trace of Susan surfaced, and with time the investigation stalled. The case, once urgent and active, gradually went cold. 3 years after Susan's disappearance in 2005, the police pursued a tip that directed them to an old Greyhound track in Port Lincoln. During the search, the officers uncovered fragments of clothing scattered across the area. Although these pieces were carefully examined, none could be conclusively connected to Susan. The discovery raised hopes of progress. Yet, without confirmation, the investigators were left without firm evidence to move the case forward. At the time, Senior Sergeant Hank Schwala spoke publicly about the investigation, acknowledging that the authorities no longer believed that Susan was alive. With this shift in understanding, the matter was reclassified as a major crime. The police suspected that a criminal close to her may have taken her life, and suggested that more than one individual could have played a role in disposing of her remains somewhere within a 30-kilometer radius of Port Lincoln. Over the years, 7 persons of interest were identified, but each was eventually cleared after further examination. Despite the passing decades, the police did not neglect Susan's case. A $200,000 reward was offered for any information that could lead to the discovery of her remains or the conviction of those responsible. The case continued to receive public attention, especially during National Missing Persons Week, most recently highlighted again in 2024. The authorities also used unusual methods to ensure the public remained aware of Susan's disappearance. Police vehicles were marked with information about her case. Posters circulated throughout Port Lincoln, and local businesses displayed posters that featured her details. This long-term effort to reach the public eventually led to renewed investigative activity. After 23 years, on September 17, 2025, the officers conducted a focused search on a property in Premier Court located next to Susan's former home. Using ground-penetrating radar and excavation equipment, they uncovered human remains in the backyard shortly before 10:00 a.m. Forensic anthropologists from Forensic Science, essay later confirmed that the remains were human. Acting Detective Superintendent Andrew McCree stated that he was very confident they belonged to Susan Goodwin, though DNA testing with her remaining family members would be necessary for final confirmation. The discovery provided the first significant breakthrough in the long-running case, offering a direction that the investigators had sought for over 2 decades. Following this development, the police arrested a 64-year-old man from Port Lincoln, identified as John Mislove. He appeared before the Port Lincoln Magistrates Court the following day on September 18th and had not yet entered a plea. Susan's family, including her partner Michelle, had endured many years of uncertainty, and both of Susan's parents passed away without learning what had happened to their daughter. Detective Superintendent Andrew McCree said, "We would not have discovered these remains without information from the public. I would implore anyone who has information about any crime to put themselves in the position of a family or friend of the victim and come forward by either contacting police directly or by contacting Crime Stoppers." In February 1985, a maintenance worker entered an apartment in Arlington, Texas, and was met with a chilling sight. Nearly 4 decades later, advancements in DNA technology and forensic genetic genealogy finally provided the breakthrough the investigators had long sought. Terri McAdams was born in 1960 and grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas as the eldest of 3 sisters. Her academic journey began at the University of Arkansas, where she immersed herself in campus life. Terri was a member of the Pi Mu sorority and an enthusiastic cheerleader. After meeting her fiancé at the University of Arkansas, Terri's life began to shift toward Texas. When he graduated and relocated to Texas for work, she followed him to Arlington to continue her studies at the University of Texas at Arlington. On February 14, 1985, she baked a heart-shaped cake for her fiancé for Valentine's Day, a symbol of her love and excitement for the life they were building together. But on that same day, Terri's lifeless body was discovered inside her Arlington apartment by a maintenance worker. Shocked by the sight, the worker immediately alerted the authorities. When the police arrived at the scene, they confirmed that Terri had met a tragic end. The authorities quickly launched a thorough investigation to determine what had happened to Terri. Crime scene investigators meticulously examined the apartment, searching for any evidence that could explain her death. Every detail was documented, and interviews were conducted with neighbors, friends, and anyone who might have had contact with her in the days leading up to the crime. Terri's fiancé was questioned early in the investigation, but the police were able to rule him out as a suspect. While his account and alibi provided clarity for the authorities, the focus of the investigation soon shifted toward other potential suspects who may have had motives or criminal histories. Despite the scrutiny, no immediate answers emerged. One person of interest was Bernard Sharp, a nearby resident with a known criminal record. The police questioned him extensively, hoping to uncover connections to Terri's case. However, the investigators were unable to gather sufficient evidence to formally charge him. Sharp's involvement remained uncertain, leaving a frustrating gap in the progress of the case. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, no arrest was made, and over time the case went cold. More than 3 decades later, the Arlington Police Department, in collaboration with the FBI Dallas Field Office, revisited her case using advanced DNA technology and investigative genetic genealogy. Physical evidence collected from the crime scene, including a cigarette butt and materials from an assault kit, was retested in 2021 to develop a DNA profile. Although the new analysis successfully created a detailed genetic profile, initial searches in CODIS produced no matches. In 2023 and 2024, the police turned to forensic genetic genealogy, a method that combines DNA profiles with extensive family tree research. Through this process, the investigators identified that Bernard Sharp is the most likely person responsible for ending Terri's life. Sharp, a nearby resident with a prior criminal history, had long been a person of interest. However, a significant obstacle remained. He had taken his own life in November 1985, roughly 9 months after ending Terri's life, making it impossible for police to collect a direct DNA sample from him. To overcome this challenge, the investigators obtained DNA from a close relative of Sharp. Laboratory testing then compared this DNA to the genetic material recovered from the crime scene, and the results confirmed a match. The resolution of the case brought an emotional sense of closure for Terri's family. After decades of uncertainty and grief, they finally learned the identity of the criminal who had taken her life. Arlington Police Chief Al Jones said, "Over the years, it would be easy to lose faith and accept that this case might never be solved. But Terri's family never gave up hope, and our detectives never wavered. Now we get to provide answers that this department has wanted to provide for nearly 4 decades." Her sister Karen Hooper said that she knows that she and my mom and dad are smiling down on this miraculous moment.